to wicked Felina. I'm Felina. Merry Christmas. I want to give you a gift. 2 true, personal, miraculous tales of St. Nicholas. Each story is true, no matter how miraculous they might seem. Sadly, the third, the journey of his bones and final resting place, relates to our current events. A question. Was it because the Western world intruded on the Islamic world, or the opposite? Hold on to the end, no matter how long, for a bonus miraculous Christmas story. I'm so happy you're sharing your time with me. The history enclosed is not recommended for little children, but suited more for 13 and up, as it is bare bones history. I'm not going to soften the truth up. If you wait till the end, after some sad historicity herein, I add on a happy note the story of another sweet saint that was born out of the bloody Crusades. You might have something under your tree that this little poor man of Assisi began in his chapel, rebuilt stone by stone with his bare hands. It is now the most important piece of any Christian home, whether they have a tree or not. Guess what it is? His, however, was real. I begin with a more recent tale of St. Nicholas. Many years ago, before the outbreak of pedophile priests, there was one named Father Porter. He molested over 60 children. As I prepared to leave the house, I heard the names of every single child he molested called off, one by one. I had to leave quickly because I was welling up in tears. How could God let this happen? It was December 6th when I decided to take a walk to church. I'd missed morning mass and made it a habit to look in the missal to see what saint's feast day it was. Nearly every day of the year is dedicated to a certain saint. I enjoy knowing in order to learn about their lives and how they imitated Christ. So, since morning mass was over, I slipped into an open door and did a naughty. I sat behind the sacred altar where they blessed the bread and wine. As I sat, I picked up the book of the saints' feast days, just to see what saint's feast day it was. My eyes fell upon his name, St. Nicholas, Patron Saint of abused and neglected children. I fell back in tears, for heaven itself laid out its own justice in a quiet way. No one at the court could date such a setup perfectly, according to the feast days of Catholic saints. And who, even I didn't know that St. Nicholas was the patron saint of abused and neglected children. He was known to give his wealth away in secret to the poorest children of the city he cared for. Second Christmas story, directly related to Mia Familia, entitled A Voglio Vendetta. I want revenge. At long last, forensic scientists have discovered the bones of the murderer of my great-grandfather. Let me explain. No, let me sum up. My great-grandfather was a master marble mason, the best, for only the best are allowed to work on tombs of saints and kings. Sadly, when he was cutting the marble for the tomb of St. Nicholas, a chip flew off and went into his arm, causing gangrene. They cut off his arm to save him, but no luck, so he died. So much for the blessings of saints and prayers. Interesting. He was a good saint. He used his inherited wealth to help children. He gave money secretly through slots in the door of poor families of little children who were due to be sold into prostitution, sex slavery. Saving many an abused and neglected child, he is celebrated on December 6th as the patron of neglected and abused children. So some saints are not so bad. On December 6th, as the giving saint that he is, every year his bones exude an oil scented like myrrh, known for its healing antiseptic properties. The oil is clear as water. Essential oil of myrrh is dark brown. Myrrh has antiseptic properties and was found on the Shroud of Turin, and it was also found to anoint the mummies of Egypt. So he was a very, very nice saint to 4th century children, but not so nice to my great-grandfather. There is your Christmas story. History. Saint Nicholas falls victim to Islam's worldwide conquest. The most successful and largest colonizers the world has ever known. If you notice the skull, pieces of the bones, and sketch, you can see, although Greek, he looks Italian. So the Baresi Italian sailors knew what they were doing, of course. Saint Nicholas was Greek and a Roman Catholic bishop who died in 342. His original tomb in Turkey, just rediscovered and being excavated as we speak, was originally a Christian country before being conquered by the Islamic world, as was North Africa, including Egypt, the Middle East, which includes Iran, Zoroastrianism, Syria, Christian also, Iraq, Lebanon, Arabia, which is pagan, Christian, Jewish, Zoroastrian, and into India, predominantly Hindu, Sikh, Buddhist, Jainism, with some Jewish and Christian. Endless raids of Italy, France, Spain, and Portugal continued from 800 to the year 1300 until pushback finally came. Europe did not want to convert, much less at the point of a sword. Can't blame them, really. It must have been an amazing thing, actually, to have conquered so much in a very short period of time. The Muslim, Ottoman, Saracen conquerors, spurred on by Muhammad's command to conquer the world, for the world belonged to Islam. St. Nicholas's bones were taken by Italian sailors to Bari, Italy, as I said before, where they belonged, as all saints belong, in Italy, to save them from the Muslim invaders who were blowing up sacred sites, including his tomb. Tombs of saints were on the top of the list, as they were seen as idol worship. Incidentally, a little extra history lesson. Saracen knights were the same ones that took over Jerusalem. Muhammad, on his deathbed, cursed the Jews and Christians for building shrines over tombs. This is why the shrine of Jonah, prophet of the Bible, was blown up along with 1700-year-old Buddhist shrines, as well as the oldest temples and statuary of humankind in Babylon. Our human history is on the chopping block. Europe, filled with its art and beauty, made by hands fashioned by God Himself, like David by Michelangelo, the Sixtine Chapel, the Mona Lisa, Leonardo, the treasures of the Louvre, everything that makes our souls sing, every cathedral and temple of each of man's attempt to give glory to God in thanks and praise will be laid bare. We do not want to offend this new religion who claims to be the last, final, unalterable, and perfect one. Let's be PC until we are all laid waste ourselves. Now, back to the Crusades. The Crusades were a response by Christendom, the Christian world, pilgrims in their effort to visit the Holy Land, where the prophets of the Old Testament and Christ walked, were being raped, robbed, and murdered. So something, Christianity felt, had to be done. We should have been pacifists like Christ taught. Just let it go. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love each other as I have loved you. Turn the other cheek, and so on. The Dome of the Rock, which is in fact Solomon's temple, built over the place where Abraham stood to sacrifice Isaac to God. The deed was in fact done to end child sacrifice and demolish the old gods, which at the time the Jews were still honoring. Judaism was born out of the old pagan beliefs. As you see at the foot of Mount Sinai, old habits die hard. God held the hand of Abraham and told him, "No, I will provide the sacrifice." Nearby was a ram caught in a thicket. In Christianity, it is believed that this is the sacrifice provided by God to come. Held by Judaism for 3,000 years, was taken over by the Muslim invaders and claimed as their holy site. There is a myth, some claim, that Muhammad stepped off to heaven after his night ride through Jerusalem. The place of the actual ascension is near the site. However, this was in fact built by Umayyad Caliph Abd al-Malik as a showpiece to the Jews and Christians that Islam is superior and has conquered you. A mosque, aside from being a place of worship in Islam, is known as a monument of conquest. We have conquered this place that once was held by you as idol worship. Islam, step by step, per order of the Prophet, conquered the entire world. Despite Jerusalem appearing nowhere in the Islamic holy books, and Muhammad's grave is far away in Al-Masjid an-Nabawi, Medina, Saudi Arabia. Islam claimed it anyway. Why would his body be in one place, his ascension be in another, and then the Temple Mount as a facade, as a showpiece, be over there? It is, after all, the last, final, unchangeable testament of God, despite the fact that it is made up of plagiarisms from Judaism, Christian heretical stories that were floating around 7th century Arabia at the time, Arab proverbs, and Hindu myths. Oh, and plus some wishes of Muhammad. As his favorite wife Aisha said, Allah is at your beck and call whenever you desire something, including some answers to scientific questions of the nature of the world and biology, not substantiated as of yet by science today. Nonetheless, it is the Jews of Israel that allow Islam to keep their holiest sites, the temple, and protect it, and all Muslims who want to use it from harm. Israelis are the guardians for all our holy sites, including Christian, despite the fact they do not believe in Christ. We owe them as the protectors of the sacred place we hold dear. The simple act of Israel to allow Islam to keep Solomon's temple without a war is the true testament of the peace of Judaism, the peace Judaism desires. Muslims have seats in the Israeli government, own businesses, and can walk the streets in peace. In the half of Jerusalem that is owned by the Palestinians, you cannot pass through to save your life. Israel has even elected a Muslim to be mayor of Nazareth, Jesus' hometown, and but for the promise that the last 4 presidents did not make good on to move our embassy to Jerusalem, Israel's capital, for 3,000 years, for the simple fact that Trump made good on. Its Muslim mayor, out of spite, has canceled Christmas there. He says to hurt Christian pilgrims. Well, the Crusades or the Muslim conquest live on. The land held by Israel today, at the time it was given to them, was territory owned by the British. Since Israel had been the home of the Jews for 3,000 years, and Hitler gave them an ultimatum, leave or be turned to ashes, they left. Since every Jewish refugee has been taken in by Israel, and not one Muslim refugee has ever been taken in by a Muslim majority country. Why is this, I wonder? Should we fault the Jews again for taking in their own? And they allow Arabs and Christians to live peacefully inside Israel as well. Are the Jews so bad after all? Just to note, Jesus was a Jew. Out of Israel was born our King. Yes, the Crusaders got out of control. In truth, they did more harm to the Byzantine Christian Empire than to the Muslim invaders in Jerusalem. See historical research on that one. According to the apocalypse of Islam, yes, there is one predicted in Islam as well. Taking over Jerusalem and Rome are a part of the prophecy before Islam, as it is so ordered, converts and takes the world. So it is understandable why this was done. President Bill Clinton reminded the crowd in front of the fallen World Trade Centers that the Christian Crusaders walked up the streets of Jerusalem, soaked to their waists in the blood of Muslim women and children. Apart from this being impossible, and that the Crusaders were there to keep the pilgrims from being raped, killed, and robbed, and the holy sites from being blown up. And so the holy city would be open to Christians, Jews, and anyone who wanted to visit. In other words, Mr. Clinton was saying, as Mr. Obama has declared in similar statements, this is payback for what Christianity has done to Muslims 1,000 years ago. Those Christians are not alive today. We chose to live in peace by the teachings of Jesus Christ. And what a way to hold a grudge. Can you imagine if your family or friend died in that attack, and you were just told it was the fault of your own faith in essence, your fault that did it? A recent attack by a jihadist in the subway of New York City before a Christmas display, and ISIS's call for terror attacks around the world in reparation for the Crusades at Christmas time makes our former president, Bill Clinton, all the more deadly, and in fact a lie that is still perpetrated to this day. The taking of Jerusalem was begun by the call of Muhammad, done in a violent extremist way. The Crusades were a response. Our holy land must be open for all to worship in. That is all. The Christian Byzantine Empire suffered more at the hands of the Christian Roman Crusaders than the Muslims did. So let it go. Most of the known world was colonized by Islam, according to the order of the Prophet. Italy alone suffered raids from Saracen knights, Muslims from Egypt, and the Ottoman Empire. From the year 800 to 1300, when they were finally pushed back, constant raids, raping, pillaging, sacking of villages, and murder at the sword for not converting to Islam. This was all in continuation of the doings of the Prophet, who raided caravans and had a penchant for war and beheadings. Muhammad converted his followers by promising them booty on earth in the form of stolen treasures, and as many sex slaves as your right hand can possess. Or if you die, houris, specially designed sex machines with big breasts and big lotus eyes, who turn back into virgins after being deflowered, along with wine, women, song, and women, everything your carnal desires could dream of, nothing of a spiritual nature to be had. Houris were just one of the many beliefs Muhammad chose to keep from the Arab pagan religion he once followed. He smashed all the idols around the Kaaba. The black box was a pagan holy site. The stone was also a pagan stone, which the pagans used to circle, as the Muslims do now, and kiss. He smashed all the idols except one, the moon god, named Allah. Why give up the good stuff when you are making up your own? The Muslim conquest also entered Spain and Portugal until pushback came. On August 14, 1480, 180 years after Italy had pushed the Muslim invaders out, a massacre was perpetrated on a hill just outside the city of Otranto in southern Italy. 800 of the city's male inhabitants were taken to a place called the Hill of Minerva and, one by one, beheaded in full view of their fellow prisoners. The spot forever after became known as the Hill of the Martyrs. In medieval warfare, the bloody execution of a city's population was commonplace, but what happened at Otranto was unique. The victims on the Hill of Minerva were put to death not because they were political enemies of a conquering army, nor even because they refused to surrender their city. They died because they refused to convert to Islam. The 800 men of Otranto were martyrs, the first victims of what was fully expected to be the relentless conquest of Italy, and then all of Christendom by the armies of the Ottoman Empire. Because of their sacrifice, however, the Ottoman invasion was slowed, and Rome was spared the same fate that had befallen Constantinople only 27 years before. As you see, even though the Crusades may have ended, they gave up. Islam did not give up. The beheadings of the men of southern Italy was in line with what the Prophet did to every Jewish man in Medina, taking the women as sex slaves. You can see why the Crusades were necessary. Also to note, Greece and Spain were conquered as well. However, due to pushback, they retained a predominant Christian population. India was partly conquered, resulting in part of the country breaking off, becoming Pakistan. The ancestors of Pakistan people today were once Hindu. A note on American history: Americans and white Europeans who got caught up in Muslim slave trade of the Barbary Coast. 1.5 million white slaves were taken by Barbary pirates, Muslims. The term leathernecks was coined by sailors, as they had to wear leather around their necks while their ships sailed in the Mediterranean, so as to not get their throats slit. The pirates, in the line of Muhammad, stole their goods and took them as slaves. The Barbary pirates were known to take women as sex slaves and kill the men. This was in keeping with the sayings and doings of the Prophet, so you can understand why they did what they did. They were only following the imitation of the great prophet who spoke directly to the angel Gabriel Since America had nothing to do with the Crusades, Thomas Jefferson asked why the Muslims were taking revenge on American sailors. The answer came, because you are infidels. Interesting, we hear all the time that it was Christendom that called the Muslims infidels, and that is why we went into Jerusalem to fight them. But it's the other way around. We are the infidels, and it is written in the Quran, we are the infidels that must be conquered, converted, or killed, crucified, beheaded. It's all in there. Contrary to contemporary myth by Barack Obama, there were no Muslim forefathers in American history. Let me repeat that. There were no Muslim forefathers in American history. Jefferson got a Quran in order to study the ideology in which his country would be fighting against. In Islam, if you are not a Muslim and a Muslim of their particular sect, you are an infidel, or you are a hypocrite or an apostate. If you were a person of the book, your life could be spared. The caveat, you must become a dhimmi, a slave, and pay the jizya to all Muslims. Half your wage must be paid to Muslims to remain alive. In the mafia, this is known as protection money. If you were a pagan, an idol worshipper like the Hindus, you were killed on the spot. You have no use. So, when you hear it is because of the meddling of the West that Muslims do these things, it is not so. Islam conquered most of the known world beginning in the 7th century by the order of Muhammad. The goal of their prophecy, apocalypse, is to take over the world, starting with the infidels' most holy cities, Jerusalem and Rome. Interesting to note, in the book of Revelations, it is the Antichrist that takes over Rome and Jerusalem, then the entire world. If you are unlucky to be a male Black African in the slave trade that was begun by Muhammad 1400 years ago, you were castrated. 1 in 30 men survived castration. The Arabs felt it was necessary, as they were plagued by stories of the Black African male prowess. The women, however, were taken as sex slaves. When a child was born, a slave child was born between the union of an Arab and a Black African woman, the child was killed instantly at birth. It is estimated that 180 million Black African slaves died in the Arab-African slave trade. As I promised you in the beginning, that out of these horrible stories of the Crusades, there was another great saint. In fact, it's because of this saint If you're a Christian, whether you be Protestant or Catholic, you probably have one in your home, whether you have a Christmas tree or not. Saint Francis of Assisi, patron saint of the poor and sick, who preached to the animals and the fishes and the wolves. And the animals listened and understood him. He was sent by his wealthy father to fight in the Crusades. After becoming sick and sickened by the violence, left and went home. There in Assisi, found the presence of God in the littlest things, the animals, the flowers, air, the wind, the sun, the moon, the butterflies, a blade of grass, and all creation itself. Hearing the voice of God one day during Mass, Sunday church service, telling him, "Go rebuild my church, it is falling into ruins." So he seemingly misunderstood this call, what Jesus was really saying. He returned all his worldly possessions, as Jesus Christ himself taught, to his Father. Francis stood naked in the town square, handing his possessions back to his Father, so he may be reborn again. "Father, I give everything back to you, even your name," and took the name Francis, meaning the Frenchman, as he was half French and half Italian. At first understood the call of God to rebuild the churches fallen by earthquakes and time around Assisi. He asked not for money to accomplish this effort, but found every stone himself, rebuilding the chapels throughout the coldest winters, sweltering summers, the spring and fall. This would be a place where the poor, the sick, the outcasts, the lepers, the elderly would be welcome, tending to their wounds, holding their hand, comforting them in death. Asking for nothing, he used the love of God and in his soul to clean, care, and shelter them, safe from winter's cold and elemental exposure. Wealthy, well-educated young men, known as the cream of Assisi, left home, possessions, shaved their skull caps, became celibate, imitating the life of Christ as humanly possible. 12, just like Christ. Sadly, corrupt church bishops rejected his pure message. You see, the poor left them and followed Francis's way, so they in turn closed his churches. Francis, wanting to know what he did wrong, left for Rome to ask the Pope. "The Holy Father will tell me what I've done," to humbly ask his guidance. The cardinals rejected him as well and tossed him out of the Vatican into the streets. Pope Innocent III demanded he be brought back. Then, from his high seat on top of the holy steps, took off his garments embroidered in gold and dropped them to the floor. Kneeling before Francis, kissed his feet, saying to him, in our obsession with original sin, we often forget original innocence. You, in your poverty, put us to shame. For he, out of all saints, stepped into the footsteps of Jesus Christ in perfection. Sadly, Francis's own church was destroyed by an earthquake in 1998. 2 additional earthquakes destroyed frescoes and the Basilica of St. Francis in 2015 and 2017. Oh Francis, we need your pure hands once again, for we are all falling as well. Now, for his addition to your Christmas devotion, as Francis loved the animals, to him they were equal in God's creation, animated with his God's spirit soul. Francis decided to build a manger, a life-size manger, inside the church, which he rebuilt with his hands, and fill it with animals, the same ones that surrounded the infant Jesus. He seated a new mother and her child in Christ's place, as every child and every soul is in Christ's place. As Jesus said, when I was naked, you clothed me. When I was hungry, you fed me. When I was sick, you comforted me. Lord, when did we do these things for you? He replied, he who does these things to the least of mine, he does it to me. Are not the animals also the least? And aren't the poorest of children the least? He built a living temple to Christ the Lord, as we, he said, are all living temples to Christ, our Father in heaven. For those of you who believe this is idol worship, I will give you a thought. I understand that in Islam, God is a master. He is not your father, and you will never be more than his slave. Does it not make sense that the creation of a great creator are its children, that this creator is not so cold and distant, that he deigned to bow to earth and dwell amongst us, to suffer our pain and know our sorrows, to die with us the cruelest death of all. If there is a God, then surely this is the most sublime thought of all. Blessed be to you all, and remember to treat yourselves and each other kindly, not only on this blessed Christmas, but always. Times will only get harder. Our love, generosity, empathy, and care will carry us through. Merry Christmas and a blessed New Year to all. Thank you for listening. I hope you will join me again in the new year. I appreciate every viewer, every subscriber, every commenter. Please let me know what you think. I hope I have been a gift to you and added some joy to your life.